Gewaltig. So we are learning the sugya of Zakin Mamre on the Yom HaPurim. What year is it? I don't know. Tough. You know what years? Yeah. I don't know my years. Pei? Tavshin Pei of Yom HaPurim. Okay. Last Purim before Mashiach comes. Okay. So Zok Gemara, I'm sorry, yeah, of course. The Torah is talking about the Zok Mamre who's a Muflash of Bezin as Rashi's B'mumcha LeBezdin B'mutit Talmud. A Talmud who's not a Dayan cannot become a Zok Mamre. That's the Mishnah says. The Chumrah that doesn't allow him to be a Dayan is a Kula. It saves him just in case he is going to rebel against the Bezin. Zok Gemara. Mimcha. So we're analyzing the whole pasuk inside. Is ki yipale mimcha. What does mimcha say? Ze yoyitz. He has to be a yoyitz. A yoyitz is a word, Dr. Rashi, that's used to describe somebody who's able to paskin and get involved in the discussion on Ibra Hashana whether or not they should add an extra adar. Where do you see the word mimech is associated with yoyitz? Because it says mimech yotza choyshev al Hashem ra. From you goes out someone who thinks of on Hashem bad, yoyetz bilial, a bad yoyetz. So you see the word yoyetz is associated with the word mimeh. Davar, davar. What does davar tell us? Zu halacha. Rashi says it's referring to halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai. L'mishpat. L'mishpat means zeh hadin. It's referring to din, as Rashi says, nechlak b'davar halamed b'din gzer shava gamuner. So if he's arguing about something that we only know through a gzer shava, he's also going to be killed for it. So for halach l'mashusina that he argues on, he will get killed for it. For something that's learned out of a gzer shava, he'll get killed for it. Bein dam ledam, if it's a question of dam. What type of dam are we talking about? Bein dam nida, or dam leda, or dam ziva. Bein din ledin, it's referring to bein din nefashos, din mamanis, or din maklis. Whether it's a question of din nefashos, din mamanis, or even a question of someone getting malchus. Bein nega lenega, bein nigay adam, nigay batim, nigay begodim. So we're almost including every little detail in the Torah that this Zok and Mamre argues on. He will be chayiv misa for. Divrei elu acharomin va'erchin v'akdeshos. Charomin are when someone says that my field should be chayrim. So we'll see there's a machlokes if it goes to the Kohanim, if it goes to the Beis Hamikdash. Erchin. What do you mean by that? I think it's between this din and that, and not in between. Right, because it's from din in the fashers to din in the mominus and anything in between, like Marcus. That's how I understood it. Okay. Revoice, dive revoice b'sharecha. Revoice is something to do with a fight, a discord. Zu hashka soita. That's referring to hashka soita, because Rashi says a soita only comes when there's this discord in the household. The arifas egla, that we understand comes through fighting, it leads to someone murdering. Utahar samatzara, which also comes from fighting, because a person becomes a mitzara if he speaks lashon hara about other people. And then it says valisa. The pasuk goes on and says valisa. So valisa malamed shebeis hamikdash kavoya me'eretz Yisrael. I'm sorry. Oh, b'sharecha. I did skip that. Thank you. B'sharecha zu leka chikcha upeya. And then it says, Vakamta mi Bezdin, you get up from Bezdin, which Rashi says, Vakamta tells us that you must be in Bezdin, because Bezdin is a place where you have to be sitting. And Bezdin is a place where the Dayanim have to sit. Valisa, you should go up. This is teaching us a side fact that Melamed Shabez Hamikdash Kaboy Eretz Yisrael. You have a raya that from wherever you are, any Bezdin that you are in Eretz Yisrael, it says when you go to the Beis Hamikdash, you're going up. So it must be that the Beis Hamikdash is Gavoy Eretz Yisrael. And Zok Rashi, the next fact has nothing to do, nor is it seen from the parsha of Zok and Mamre, but it's a fact that the Tana feels is appropriate to share with us now. The Eretz Yisrael Gavoya Mikol Haratzis. Ke'ela Mokim, Malamed Shamokim Goyim. You see that it's the place that's Goyim, meaning this only works if you go to the Beis HaMikdash. As Rashi says, no, Rashi doesn't say, Tosfos says, Malamed Shamokim Goyim Lafuke Mitzoin Motzon Beis Pagi. If this happened in Beis Pagi, if the Bezdin happened to not have been in their proper place at the time, they were out on an excursion, and you met the Bezdin in Beis Pagi, the Himralayim, there would not be a chiyuv of Zaken Mamre, only if they go to the Bezdin. Zok Gemara, let's analyze now. Bishlama Beis HaMikdash Kavaya Meretz Yisrael. I understand how we see that in the Parsha of Egla Rufa, that the Beis HaMikdash is the tallest place in Eretz Yisrael. Tichsiv v'alisa. Ella, Eretz Yisrael Gavoya Mikol Haratzos. How do you know that? How do you see in the pasuk of Zaken Mamre that Eretz Yisrael is higher than everywhere else? Minole. So tomorrow Tichsiv, it's from a different place. It says, Lachein hine yomim boim ne'um Hashem, lo yomru chai Hashem asher hela es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, kim chai Hashem asher hela asher hevi es zera beis Yisrael me'eretz Tzafona umikol haratzos asher hidachtim sham v'yoshuvu al Moshe. From when Mashiach comes, Hashem is going to take us from all the lands of the world up to Eretz Yisrael. So you see that from wherever you're coming from in the world, if you're headed to Eretz Yisrael, you're going up. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Tanu Rabbanan.
Well, I mean, it doesn't mean that literally, does it? Doesn't mean.
Can't mean that. I don't know if Eretz Yisrael is the highest place above sea level.
It's absolutely not.
So it can't mean literally.
What? No. Okay. So it's.
I think it means price wise. It's the most expensive.
Yeah.
Flight.
Yeah. That could be. That's possible.
There's going to be a day where it's going to be the most expensive.
Right.
We're there.
Okay. Okay.
Also, literally, the Beis HaMikdash wasn't even the highest place in Eretz Yisrael.
That's right.
Out, Ein Itam was a place that was even higher than Yerushalayim, where the Beis HaMikdash is. The Midlimine, like we learned in Perek Ezra Mekayim and Zvachim, there was a havmin to build the Beis HaMikdash in Ein Itam because it's the highest, but for some reason it wasn't. But Inami Kaisle Beis HaMikdash Gavaya Ein Itam, the Gavim Kavama. You don't count from the floor; you count from the top of the walls. But even so, it's not the highest place in the world. But
well, in Eretz Yisrael, the Hermon is the highest point in Eretz Yisrael.
So the highest must take on other meanings.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to clarify that.
And now, even if you take a connecting flight, it's still the highest. Not only for a direct flight. Because Zaken Mamre Eine Chayiv Ela Al Davar Shezedoynei Kares Ushigagase Chatos. Zaken Mamre is only chayiv if what they're arguing about is something that if it was done b'mezid, there would be a chiv kares, and if it was done b'shayig, it would be a chiv chatas. Diver of Meir. So the Gemara's, the most of what we're going to learn today is the Gemara's going to say, how does Reb Meir explain the brayso we just learned? There's a list of all different types of halachas that at first glance, like a chich champeya, how in the world could that be something that you're chayiv kares on, right? A lot of things are listed off here that at first glance it doesn't seem like they could lead to a chiyuv kares, and that's what the Gemara is going to be focused on today. Rabbi Yehuda al davar she'ikroi midivrei Torah. It has to be something that its main halacha is in the Torah, upirushoi, but the details are midivrei seifrim, are from the Rabbanim. So it has to be a very unique type of thing that they're arguing about. Rabbi Shimon afilu diktuk echad midiktukei seifrim. Any little tiny little thing that the Chachamim might say is also something that, if argued upon, makes someone into a Zaken Mamre. My time with Reb Meir. Why did Reb Meir say that Zaken Mamre is only davar shesdoinei kares v'shiglasei chatos? Gomer davar. He learns davar. Ksefachar kipali mamcha davar lemishpat. So Chasam by a par helam davar shel tibur, which is a chiv chatos because it's avodah zarah. V'nelam davar me'ini akol. Malalon davar shechayev al zedoni koris val shilul gasei chatos. Afkan davar shechayev al zedoni koris val shilul gasei chatos. Rabbi Huda, he says it's something that ikar in the Torah, and there's a drush on it, because it says al pi Torah asher yerucha. Al pi the Torah that they teach us. Adika Torah v'yerucha. There has to be something that's before the Torah, and there's a yerucha added onto it. Rabbi Shimon, who says any little diktuk, asher yugidu lecha min amokai mahu, afilu kol any tiny little thing that Chachamim tell us is something that, if argued upon, could trigger the halacha of zaken mamre. Amar Rav Huna bar Chinna Rav, could you do me a favor? Tirgam ali laham asnis aliv Rav Meir. Show me how our brayso that we learned that lists off all the different types of halachas that if a zaken mamre argues on, he'll be chayiv. How is that going to be consistent with Rav Meir, where it's chayiv increases? Amalei Rava or Papa. So Rava told Rav Papa, I guess he subcontracted this responsibility that was given to him by Rav Huna. Hook tirgam, go out and be mitargim. Now find the halachas that all of these different things are referring to as chayiv increases. So he said as follows: Ki yipalei b'mufla shebebezin nakosav v'daber. It's speaking again about a posik. Ki yipalei mincha ze yoyis. It's referring to somebody talking about inyonei ibur hashanim. We're talking about a big gadol who is able to even talk about ibur shanim and kriyas chadoshim. How is this nageh to achiv kares? Kedetan, like we learned in the Mishnah. Hey neidu, they were made shema'aber mesashona kol adar. There was a machlokes. So the Chachamim said that they could make an extra adar until the very last day of adar. Because why did they say that? Because others said only Adar Purim. You can only be Maver the Shana at an Adar until Purim. After Purim you can't. And Rashi says because once it's Purim, it's already 30 days before Pesach. And the people were already Shoy Alan V'Darshan V'Ilchas Pesach. And it means everyone already is expecting the next month to be Pesach. And if you change it, it's going to, people might not row, people will get confused. So therefore, once Purim arrives, you can no longer push Pesach off by a month. But Zok the Gemara, it's very obvious why they would be a chiv kares. Let's say they were ma'aver to Shana after Purim. If you hold that it works and it really doesn't work, right? If you hold it really doesn't work, come to Chodesh next month, you're going to be eating chametz because you're going to say it's Adar Beis when it's really Pesach. If it's the other way around, also kashari chametz b'Pesach. No matter who said what, there could be eating chametz b'Pesach, because if you hold that it really works, and if it really works, and you hold it doesn't work, so what's going to happen is that you're going to be matar chametz b'Pesach the next month, because they pushed it off. So therefore, this is how this could be relevant to a chiv kares. Davar ze halacha. That's referring to halacha. Halacha l'Moshe Messinai. How is that relevant to a chiv kares? Zu hilchas echadosa. Now we know that the halacha l'Moshe Messinai tells us that there's a cycle for a woman how she sees dam, and there's 11 days of nida. I'm sorry, there's 7 days of nida. So if she sees dam for 7 days, she's a nida, whether or not she sees dam. At the end of those 7 days, it's already not a normal time for her to see dam. And for the next 11 days, so it's an 18-day cycle. For the next 11 days, if she sees dam, she becomes a zofa. Now we all know, how does Hilchas Ziva work? If she sees dam one day in those 11 days, she's called a shemeres yoim keneged yoim, meaning she sees it on Monday, Tuesday, she's tamei, and she has to watch to make sure she doesn't see any dam. If she sees dam a second day, then she's still a shemeres yoim keneged yoim. If she sees dam a third day, then she's a zova gedola, and then she needs shiva nekiyim. We treat any type of dam that any woman sees always as being seiser, a ziva, which makes her into a ziva gedola. But I'll call upon them, if it's only 11 days, so what happens if on day 11 a woman sees dam? Does she have to be shemeres yoim keneged yoim? Of course not, because tomorrow she can't be a nida anymore. Tomorrow she would be a nida. I mean, if she sees tomorrow it's a nida. She can no longer be a zava. But there was a shaila. What about the 10th day? Because on the 10th day, She could be Shemer Yom Keneged Yom. She could watch day 11, but it could never possibly lead to a Zava Gedaila because you only have 10 and 11. Day 12 already goes back to the cycle of Nida. So the Itmar, what would be the halacha Asiri if she saw Dam on day 10 out of the 11 days of Ziva? Rabbi Yochanan Omar Asiri Kichi. Just like she saw on day 9, you had to be Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom because if she saw Chi, it's possible to have 3 days, right? 9, 10, and 11. Rabbi Shimon Lakish no, Asiri is ke'echad because it could never lead to a Zova Gedaila. So since it doesn't lead to a Zova Gedaila, Hu Adin, you don't even use it as a day that you count. Rabbi Yochanan or Asiri Kichi, Ma Chi Boy Shimur. Just like by Chi, you need to be Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom, and you have to watch day 10. Av Asiri Boy Shimur. Rabbi Shlokish Amar, Asiri ke'echad Asiri, if she sees on day 10, it's as if she saw on day 11. Just like if she saw on day 11, she wouldn't be Shemer Shem Keneged Yom because we know it's impossible for her to become a Zovak Doila. Anyway, Af Masiri Loi Boi Shima. So the question is, if she was a Shemer Shem Keneged Yom, the halacha is there's also a chi of chorus for someone to live with his wife. So if there's a machlokes over here, whether or not a woman is Shemer Shem Keneged Yom, that is something that's related to a chi of chorus. Okay. Mishpat, what is Mishpat Zehadin? That's referring to din, which Rashi told us earlier. Im nechlak v'davar alamed b'din gzer shach. So how will that be relevant to Chiv Karis? Baruch Hashem, this will be a familiar case. Bitay manusasai. How do we know bitay manusasai? If you remember, when it's talking about his own children, it says it's bas bitay ves bas b'noi, but it never mentions his own daughter. But when talking about his wife's children, it says you shouldn't marry a woman or her daughter or her granddaughter. So we learn, just like we're talking about his wife's children, it means her daughter directly is also her. So too, when it's talking about his children, even though the pasuk doesn't say so, but fairish, it means his daughter. We just learned that a couple of days ago, maybe weeks ago. Everything happened so fast enough. You know what I mean? The Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Avudimai, Asya Heina Asya Zima. It says Heina when it's talking about his grandchildren, right? A person can't live with Bas Benoi or Bas Bitoi. It says Heina where it's talking about his wife's children, and by his wife's children, it also Zima, which we also learn from a different place where it says Zima that says there's a Chiyuv Misa. So once again, this could be the Machlokes. The Machlokes is if he argues on this Gzer Shava, clearly it would lead to a Chiyuv Kares. Okay? Bein Dam Ledam. So it's referring to Dam Nida, Dam Leda, and Dam Ziva. So Dam Nida, what machlokes would there be regarding to Dam Nida as to whether or not there's a Chiyuv Kares? So Akmar Beplukta da Kavya ben Mahalel. The Rabbanon and the Rabbanon. It's not we learned Dam Hayorik. What if the Dam is green in color? Is that called Dam Nida? Now we know, Midiraisa, if a woman sees Dam Nida for the next 7 days, even if she continues to see Dam, it doesn't mean anything. As long as at the end of the 7 days the Dam stops, she toivels and she's taught, right? That's the deraisa. So what if on day 1 she saw green Dam, and on day 7 she saw red Dam? So Akavim and Hal Matame, he holds that Dam HaYorik is Tomei. So therefore, if he saw a Dam that was Yorik on day 1, and saw real Dam, I shouldn't say real Dam, saw red Dam on day 7, it doesn't make a difference. At the end of that day, she's tar anyway. But the Chachamim are tiring. But the Chachamim hold that Dam Yorik is tar. Meaning if she saw on day 1 Dam Yorik, and on day 7 she saw Dam Edom, now she's got to wait for another 7 days because the first Dam that she saw was never a Nida in the first place. Okay, Gavalti. And that will make a difference if she's a Nida or not. And of course, Boil Nida's cars. Okay, Dam Leda. Where do you see a machlokes in reference to Dam Leda that could be a Chiyuv Kares? They looked at the Rav Alevi. Now we know that it says in Parshas Tazria, if a woman gives birth for the first 7 days, if it's a Zachar, it's Dam Tameh, she's Tameh. And for the first 2 weeks, if it's in a Nekeva, right? Then there's Yemei Tahira. After those 2 weeks by a girl, for the next 66 days, any Dam she sees is Dam Tayar, and she won't become Tameh even if she sees that Dam. And by a boy, the next 33 days. And under that period, she goes back to regular. If she sees Dam, it'll be Dam Nida. So the question is, this dam that changes in status from dam tame to dam tahar back to dam tame again, what's happening over here? So there's a machlokes Rav and Levi as to what's happening. The Itmar. Rav Amar ma'ayin echatu hatar timasoi v'hatar te'arosoi. This sounds like it's a machlokes and metzias. I'm not sure how we would make it not a machlokes and metzias. Rav holds it's the same dam coming from the same makar, except the Torah is geyser that this dam is tamei and this dam is tahar, but it's really the same dam in essence. Levi Amar no, shnei mayon the same. The dam is coming from two different places, and dam tahar is coming from a different place. That's tahar, and dam tamei is coming from a different place. That's tamei. So nistam tamei, the ma'ayin that's giving off dam that tamei closes, and then niftach hatar. So after the 7 days of a zachar or 14 days of a nekeva, her dam, she stops bleeding from this area, and she could start bleeding from a different area, which will only give off dam tahar. Nistam hatar, and then niftach hatamei. And in the end of the dam tahar period, that ma'ayin closes, a new ma'ayin opens. Again, I don't think if you understand how it works, I think it's the same dam. It comes from the uterus. So I don't know how this would be explained. I guess, and when we learn Nida, we'll probably get an explanation as to how this fits into how we understand the anatomy. So Zok to Gemara, Nibtach Hatamei. Now, so how is this relevant? So the Torah says it's very relevant, because what happens if she's bleeding in the Yemei HaTumah, the first 7 days of a Zachar, let's say, and it doesn't stop bleeding. She's continuing to bleed through, after 7 days, 8 days, 9 days, 10 days, 11 days. So if you hold it's the same dam, but the Torah declares now this dam is tar, so it will be tar. It's the same dam, it's bleeding. A moment ago that blood was dam tamei, now it's dam tar, or at the end of the cycle, a moment ago this was dam tar, and now it's dam tamei. So if you hold it's ma'ayin nechru, that would be the halacha. However, Levi holds it's nistam hatamei niftach hatar, and therefore he holds if it was bleeding straight through, we'll say that the original makar has not stopped yet. So let's say you're bleeding, a woman is bleeding through 7th and 8th day, didn't stop bleeding. You can't say that one pocket closed and a new pocket opened. It's the same blood, it was continuing to run. So he holds, unless she stops bleeding, I'm sorry?
Running continuously the whole time?
Well, we're talking about the transition period. So let's say
There's a
day
transition,
7.
Then it stopped.
But it didn't stop. What if it didn't stop? What if the woman didn't stop bleeding? So Zokt Levi, there you cannot say that it was Nistam Atame. It never closed. So you have to wait until she stops bleeding. Once she stops bleeding for a little bit and she starts bleeding again, then we'll say it becomes Dam Torah, which means it doesn't automatically change by a boy at the end of day 7 and at the end of day 60. It could be pushed off by a couple of days in the event that there was no pause. So now you have a huge nafkamina l'gabei chiyuv koros. At the beginning, when it went from Dam Tami to Dam Tar, if she was bleeding straight through, according to Levi, this would be Tame, and according to Rav, this would be Tar. So that's enough coming of a chiyuv koros. The same thing would be at the end. If she was bleeding through the Dam Tar and she went after the 60 days or after the 80 days, so according to Rav, that would be Dam Tame, because it transitions automatically. But according to Levi, you'll say, no, it's still the Dam Tar. So there you have your nafkamina in the chiyuv koros. Okay, gewaltig. Dam Ziva. Where is there a chiluk by Dam Ziva? The plukta de Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yeshua. The Malchus Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yeshua. That's now. Kishisa shloisha yomim b'soich echad osa yom. What if a woman, if a woman sees Dam Machmas Leda, that's not Dam Nida, right? So what happens if for 3 days straight within a 11-day period for 3 days straight she is bleeding, but not only is she bleeding, she's also feeling terribly painful labor pains. So we need to know as a litmus test, is this dam coming from her birth? Is this birthing bleeding, which is tahar, or is this ziva? So what is the litmus test? Im shavsa me'es la'es v'yolda. If for 24 hours the pain stopped, but she was still bleeding, then we know that clearly the bleeding was not coming from her labor, because even after her pain stopped, she was still bleeding. So Arezu Yoldus B'Zoif. We consider this a Yerledis who's a Zava Gedoyla, and she won't be able to be Matar herself till after the whole cycle. because she has to go through Shiva Nakim. Divei Rabbi Elazar. But for Rabbi Shua, it's not 24 hours. It could be longer. It has to be a day that was preceded by a night. Rabbi Shua Laila v'yoim kelele Shabbos v'yoimai. And sheshavsim in a tsar, when we say the litmus test is if it stops, it doesn't mean stop bleeding. It means the pain stopped, and that would be a litmus test to show that the dam is not coming from her labor pains, because for 24 hours or from a laila v'yoim, she had no pain, yet she was still bleeding. That's dam ziva. So here you have a huge nafkamina, because if it was 24 hours of no pain, but it wasn't the night and the day, it would be a machlokes if this woman is a yoledes beziva or not. So once again, it's related to achiv koros. That's what the second sheet holds. So if on Tuesday afternoon she stops feeling pain, one mandamar holds that as long as she gives birth by Wednesday afternoon, she'll be a zava gedola, right? But on the other hand, if you hold, you need a night followed by a day. So even if 24 hours passed where she didn't have any pain, we still consider her yoledes and not a zava, because that window is a little longer. It's still the end of the day that was followed, that was preceded by a night. So therefore, she has more time to consider herself as a yoledes and not a zava. So the second sheet is actually mekel. Okay, bein din ledin. What's the din ledin? Bein din mamanis, din nefesh, din makas. So how are these all related to chiv kares? So din mamanis. How could din mamanis be related to a chiv chatas? So plukta the Shmuel of Rabavo. The Amar Shmuel Shnayim Shadonu. What if there were two people who sat down to paskin on din mamanis? Is that a valid psak? So Shmuel said dineim din elosh nekroin best nechotzav. Their psak has validity, but that's called the best nechotzav. They didn't have three people, but it would be a valid din. Rabbi Vo said l'divrei hakol ein dineim din. So how is that relevant to achiv kares? Zok Rashi, this is where the yeshiva shechap comes from. Zok Rashi, what if this bezdin paskin that Reuven has to pay Shimon $100? Okay, and Shimon went and grabbed $100 from Reuven. Is that Shimon's money or not? It depends. If you're like Shmuel, it is Shimon's money because the psak was valid. But if you hold like Reb, like a Ravo, then it's not Shimon's money when Shimon took it. So how is this negate to chiv kares? Because then he went and there was Mekadosh Anisha with it. You know, Rebbe said Mekadosh Anisha die. Then he went and there was Mekadosh Anisha with this. If you hold that it's his money, then she's Mekudeshes. So the chiv misa, someone's muzana with her. But if not, then it's not a good kedusha. So everything goes to l'manach kedusha isha. So now we're using those yeshiva shechapos, not kedusha isha. I always want to know where it comes from, because every time you ask, every time your Rebbe declares a shaila and shir, and the shaila is such a dak, like a shaila that it doesn't make a difference if it's A or if it's B. You ask them what's the nafkamina. So your Rebbe always says the nafkamina is if you're mekalish lady al manas like it's tzad A and not tzad B. The nafkamina will be a chiv krisis. So it comes from this gemara where you can make anything you want into chiv krisis by hinging it and linking it to a kedusha. Okay, din in the foshes. What's din in the foshes? Beplukta the Rabbi V'Rabbanan. We're arguing about Rabbi V'Rabbanan, which means the peasant took one position and he took the other position. The Tanya Rabbi Omer, says v'nosata nefesh tachas nefesh. This is a machlekes. What this means? This is referring to somebody who kills a woman when he was aiming for his friend who he was fighting with. Would he be chayav misa for that? In other words, neschaven lahar gezeh, which we had, is that person chayav misa or not? So one man of holder means mamay, because you don't neschaven lahar gezeh is not chayv misa, so therefore he would have to pay the value of this woman to her husband. Maybe you kill somebody who kills a woman even though he was aiming for somebody else because he was neschar of lar gezer or gezer. So nemer l'sina l'mayla, v'nemer l'sina l'mata. Mal alon mammon. By other things where it says ay tachazayin and all these things, it's referring to mammon. Avkan mammon. So too when it says v'nesata nefesh tachas nefesh here, it means you pay for it. Okay, so once again, how is this related to a chiv kares? The nafkamina is if that money, if someone went and took that money and was mekadosh anisha with, right? If he's entitled to that money because nefesh tachas nefesh means mammon, the lady's mukadeshes, and if not, no. So this is another one where the nafkamina is likadusha isha. This one says yeshiva shesugya. So Rashi says here all the way at the end. I'm sorry, so it's not by Ein. Okay, weiter. Now we have another case that's again going to have a similar situation. Dinamakis. The plug to Rabbi Shmuel v'Rabbanan. The time we learned Makos begimel. If you give somebody Malchus, there has to be 3 people on the bezdin to paskin if someone get Malchus or not, which is the smallest type of bezdin. But Rabbi Shmuel Amar, you need the Chav Gimel. You need a bezdin of Chav Gimel. If you remember, the Machlokes was totally in whether or not Malchus is like Dinin Nefashos or not. So do you need a bezdin of 23 or a bezdin of 3 is enough? Again, what does this have to do? What does this have to do with Achiv Misa? So Rashi says, B'chav Gimel, let's say you need a bezdin of 23 to give somebody Malchus, and they used a bezdin of 3, so it was a non-valid bezdin. They weren't allowed to give him these Malchus. So the guy who gave Malchus, even though he wasn't allowed to, because he didn't have a bezdin, you're a chayvel. So if the guy who was hit takes that money from you, is it his money? Are you a chayvel? And therefore it's his money and he can be mekayel with it. Or if it's a legit psak, then that money is not his money and therefore he can't be mekayel with it. So this again is now kumida likidusha isha. Okay? Then we have our next item, neges, negoyim. Bein nega lenega. Bein nigei adam and nigei bottom and nigei begodim. So again, we have to illustrate how these 3 items could lead to a chiv. Chorus, nigei adam is bepluked to the Rabbi Shmuel v'Rabbanan. That's not we learned. In Baharis, kodim l'seir lavan. Normally, a seir lavan grows, and then there's the sar. Okay, so if the Baharis is kodim l'seir lavan, so if there was a sar lavan first, and then the Baharis came, that's the deraisa. Everybody agrees that's going to be a nega. But what if first the Baharis came, and then a seir lavan came? So then there's a machlokes. So one man holds Tomei, but Imsar Lavan, I'm sorry, if the Baharis came first, that's the textbook case of a nega, that's a regular nega that's Tomei. But Imsar Lavan Kodem Baharis, if first he had white hair, and then he had a Baharis, then it's Torah. So I'm safe. I have all white hair. So it's not shayach for a white hair to show up in a Baharis, right? But Suffolk, what if it's a Suffolk? What came first? Then the halach is Tomei. Rabbi Shuaimer Keha. We don't know what Keha means. Keha means it's lighter. What does that have to do with if it's a Suffolk Tomei or Torah? So the Gemara asks, my Keha, what does this Keha mean? So we know it says if the nega became lighter, it's Torah. So Keha was a word that Rabbi Yeshua used to describe Torah. Amrava Keha, Torah. And so we have a machlokes if this person is Torah or not. Well, that's now it's obviously Geya Tachiv Koros. Because what if he walked into the Beis Hamikdash with such a condition? Is he Chayiv Koros or not? So that you don't have to come on to Kedusha Isha. How about Nigei Batim? The plug to the Rabbi Loza, Rabbi Shimon, Rabban. It's now we learned Rabbi Loza, Rabbi Shimon, Omer, La Olam Eina Bayis Tamei, Ad Shiyura Kishnei Grisen Al Shnei Avonim B'Shtei Ksolim B'Keren Zovis Or Chai Kishnei Grisen V'Rach Meika Gris. We learned this already. A nega batim, you can't just have a nega on a flat wall. The nega has to dafka be in a corner, and on each point of the corner, there has to be a nega, which is a gris by a gris. So if you look at them all together, you'll have a nega that's 2 gris in long by 1 gris high. And you have a nega that's going from one corner, from one wall to another wall, crossing over. That's the only thing that would make a nega batim tummy. While one would argue. So the Gemara asked, my time with Rabbi Elazar, where did he get this from? That you have to have this unusual type of nega that goes across a corner. Because it says kir, the nega is bekir abayis, it's in the wall. It also says when you found the nega bekirais abayis, in the walls plural of the house. So kirais. Ezoi kir, who could kirais? How could you have a nega on one wall and call it 2 walls? That's only possible if the nega goes from one wall to its intersecting wall. So again, how is this negeya to a chiyav kares? Very simple. If someone walked into that house and he became tomei, and then he went into the Beis Hamikdash, there would be a chiyav kares. And if he's not tomei, there wouldn't be a chiyav kares. I think Rashi has a second option. There's only one case. Someone walked into the house. So that would be Nagea to a Chiv Karis. And then you have the last one, Nige Begodim. What would be the machlokes about Nige Begodim as to whether or not it would have a Chiv Karis? The Plukta, Rabbi Yonason ben Avtulmus v'Rabbanim. The Tanya Rabbi Yonason is Rabbi Yochanan ben Avtulmus Omer Minayin lepricha. There is a halacha that if someone has a nega on his body and it grows and covers his entire body, automatically he's tar. Now, does that apply to nigei begodim as well? If the nega spreads to the whole beged, so minayin lepricha bebegodim, she tar, then it's also tar. We learn it from nigei adam. Nemra karachas v'gabachas ba'adam. It talks about person who's bald and the nega in one of those places by a human. The nemra karachas v'gabachas bebegodim. The Torah also talks about a karachas and gabachas when it talks about nigei begodim. Mal alon. Just like nega in a human, parach b'kulei tar, avkan parach b'kulei tar. And again, the nafkamina would be if you took this beged into the Beis Hamikdash, or if you touched the beged and then you walked into the Beis Hamikdash. If you hold it tamei, then someone's going to be chayiv paris for that, and if you hold it tar, then someone won't be chayiv paris for that. Okay, I think we should stop here, and we're literally in the middle of going through all the different cases of the brisa, how they can be chayiv paris. So that's what Shlomi Feinter asked me if we can't make it today, could we learn a little earlier on Shabbos and then learn two blatter? So I told him really it works out good because really these two blatter is one blot because we're literally in the middle of going through explaining the brisa. So for those who couldn't make it today, we're going to learn on Shabbos an hour and a half before, and in that half hour we should easily be able to finish the blot that we just did, and then Shushan Purim is back to business. Okay, please. Dumb and Dumber, very good. I like that.